So I want to talk to you about what I think we can learn from cybercriminals, and it follows nicely from Jonathan's talk. Let me start here. If the clicker works, hold please. Maybe not. OK, I'm going to do it this way. Let me let you ponder this while I figure this out. What is this worth? I don't know that people would argue too much about the value of it. Some people might say, well, it's the paper, but most people say, OK, $100, currency printed there. Not working. OK. What about this? That's a goat. So you might start to ask yourself some questions. Are you using it for milk? Are you going to slaughter it? Is it somebody's pet? How much does it weigh? Is it male or female? There's a whole bunch of questions you might ask. And goats are still used as currency in certain areas. But you kind of have to walk your way around it through a series of interrogation. What about this? How much is this worth? A lot to some people. We know it's worth something, but how much is what we struggle to answer. So here's where I want to start. There's no standard way of valuing sensitive data. And I'm going to give you the whole talk right now, so if you get bored, you got it all. You can leave. So here's what's wrong. Our current model of how we think about sensitive data is a bit broken. It's outmoded, I would say. So why does that matter? Well, as you heard a bit from Jonathan, as I'm going to talk about, cybercriminals have created a market to value that data. So there are some principles from economics that I'd like to try and apply or propose that I think can help us shift, reframe, and redefine the way we think about sensitive data. Here's another question for you. What would you most hate to lose? So I can tell you what it is for me, and it's just like an everyday thing. It's really small. So on the left are sunglasses that someone very dear to me gave me, and that company doesn't make them anymore, and I always know where they are. And then on the other is my laptop, and I sometimes lose track of it. Full disclosure. When I get to the hotel room, I put the glasses in that place, and I know that's where they're going to go, and that's their spot. And the laptop I sort of put down, and I'm like, I should probably put that in the vault, whatever else. So we're talking about a little bit here sentimental value and monetary value. But really, those sunglasses don't have market value. Right? If someone took them, they could try and resell them. They wouldn't get very much. I don't think they were that expensive to begin with. But the laptop, they surely could. So why am I protecting the wrong thing? Why am I protecting the thing that ostensibly doesn't have as much value? So let's go back to data. What kind of asset is data? Here's a rubric that I try and use and want to propose, and it's rough. It's not exact. But so you have extrinsic and intrinsic, which is a fancy way of saying intangible. Intangible and monetary and non-monetary. And extrinsic and monetary, in that category, we have things like cash, products, property, and then intangible and non-monetary, people, servers, printouts. And you could argue some of these and say, well, that's more this category. That's what I said, rough rubric. And then on the intrinsic side and monetary, we have things like, for organization, stock price, intellectual property, source code. There wouldn't really be a question that it has monetary value, but I can't get to it. And then ideas and concepts like identity and brand, corporate identity and reputation. So here's the group of assets. Which one does data fit in? I struggle with that a lot. And when I talk to organizations and otherwise, and information security professionals and risk assessment professionals, you start the risk assessment process. What's the asset? Where does it fit in? So let's talk about data breaches. Right now, the methodology for looking at data breaches and the cost of a data breach comes down to some of these factors, some subset of these factors. We have what's the impact on the reputation, trust of the organization, who's at fault, what was the intent, how big was it, how many records, what does it cost to remediate? That's kind of the closest we get to the cost of a data breach. What type of sensitive data? The challenge with this, well, first of all, they're trying to answer two questions fundamentally. What happened? That's at first set. And then how bad is it? But here's the issue. Asking what is the cost of data breach still doesn't get us to what is the actual value of the compromised data. We don't know what that's actually worth. So now we go to cybercriminals. Cybercriminals have created a market for this data. When companies say, I don't know how to value this, I can say, well, there's a group over there that ostensibly are your competitors that do know how to use it and value it. So let's talk about that. Start with the dark web. What is the dark web? You get these images, and you recognize them. The black-headed hacker, icebergs. I don't have that button on my keyboard, the darknet button. And then, images and movies and fiction. And then, if you've been on YouTube, you've seen these, mystery unboxing. But a lot of misinformation, a lot of FUD. So here's the way I do think about it. I think about the dark web as a really big, weird flea market. There's variety, and there are some disturbing nightmare fuel type things on there. It's illicit, distributed, not necessarily organized, but make no mistake, sophisticated and resilient, particularly when it comes to selling stolen and leaked data and the trade of that. And we saw some of that in Jonathan's talk, and I want to re-emphasize that point, that cybercriminals think of themselves as entrepreneurs. So here's a screenshot of someone selling card data. So let's talk about how cybercriminals break this down. It's not just I have these cards for sale. So what you have is obviously the city, state, and then also which bank it's part of, what category it's in, and then the BIN number. How many of you know what a BIN number is? Or a BIN, sorry, just a BIN. How many of you know what a BIN is? Okay, it stands for bank identification number. On your credit card or gift card, there's those 16 digits, sometimes 19 digits. The first 6 identify the bank and what type of card it is. So you see that on the far left. And there's other data types. There's, of course, including if it's the CVV, the security code, if it's verified by Visa or MasterCard, and there's the expiration date, and then there's the track data that's on the card. And there's actually 3 tracks. And so carders and fraudsters will be very detailed about what kind of data is available. And they list it just the way we used to on auctions and online marketplaces. So there's a product description, there's the seller, the price, product reviews. Indeed, all of this is turned into a very sophisticated marketplace. If you're curious to see more, there's a number of papers out there. One just came out last year looking at collecting data from across these different groups that is pretty solid from University of Arizona that I would recommend. So let's go a little further. Like I said, you can go by card type, and you can also look at how that data is, how recent that data is. So what do cybercriminals value? Freshness is one principle. Reputation, and indeed customer service. If I buy something from someone online on Etsy or eBay and something goes wrong, I might try and negotiate with them or something else, but there's no trust and safety teams on the darknet. So how do you know about what you're getting? Someone could disappear. Reputation is the currency. And I want to make sure a seller, a vendor wants to make sure that a buyer gets what they're promised. And then they say, make sure to give me 5 stars. It's still that way. And they'll even promise if I offer to sell 100 cards and I promise a 98% validity rate and 90% of them were valid, I will swap them out for valid cards. Make sure the product is solid. So there's a real sense of marketing here and freshness, but there's things that we don't think about because we're not only not thinking about the exploitation of the data, but also in this environment where it's de-anonymized and it doesn't have to do with privacy or anything else, just as a commodity in and of itself. How many of you have seen this visualization before? Okay. It can be a little overwhelming. It's an interactive site, actually, from a really great data visualization site called Information. It's beautiful. There's the link down at the bottom. If you want to play with the data, that's there as well. And they draw from Have I Been Pwned and databreaches.net and a few other sources to visualize data breaches. And so This one's not interactive, but you can do it by year, by sensitivity, by industry, what the vector was. And it's really interesting and gives you a perspective. But this, just looking at this alone, is fatiguing, breach fatigue. So let's go back to what those different breaches mean. Are they bad? Is this one bad in and of itself? People ask us all the time. How bad is this one? How bad is it? And the way I think about it is it starts to fill in this blank. It starts to really deepen and broaden this ocean of stolen data. So MyHeritage, if you recall, was relatively recent. It was ancestry data, Equifax. There's one that was somewhat interesting because people notionally understood what was in their credit profile. And so they knew what was the granularity and the depth of it. MyFitnessPal, health and location data, Marriott, travel and sensitive. Each of these on its own might go, well, there's just that, well, there's just that. But you start to put this together in a package, and you get a fuller and more complete picture. And for cybercriminals and fraudsters, they're just waiting to fill in the blank for exploitation, for account takeover, identity theft. And of course, you probably all remember Strava and geolocation and exposure of OPSEC. I think that was just about a year ago. Well, we continue to see location data being released and people starting to understand that this is a layer of data. So it's an individual's record, and this is what's important about thinking about data as an economy. There's an individual record, right? You can follow an individual based on where they sleep, work, live. And then there's a population that you can track as well. And then you can use it as a layer on top of something else. So it's a record, it's data, it's a data set, and it's constantly updated. So there's these two really great reports. If you haven't seen them, top one from the New York Times, bottom one from Motherboard, looking at cell phone location data and geo-tracking data. And so with these layers, now we understand, okay, these are very valuable, and cybercriminals start to understand this, haven't started to see the trade of geolocation data, biometric data. I think it might just be a matter of time. That's my call. So what do we do? So economics can help us out here because it is in the discipline of trying to value something. So the first concept I want to introduce is around the consumer price index, which you may have heard this briefly or be somewhat familiar with it. Economists come up with a basket of goods that they believe households purchase on a regular basis. Eggs, bread, milk. And so first of all, they make an assumption there. Not every household gets all of those every week, but at least there's some basic concept. And then what is the price of each of those goods, and what does that look like as a basket, and then how does that change over time? This allows them to do several things. First, they have to make some assumptions about what that basket looks like, but now based on that, they can see what is the purchasing power of a household, and how does that look over an economy overall, and how does that change with the currency? So there's some assumptions underneath. At the bottom there, you'll recognize those: HIPAA, ISO, PCI. These are all compliance, regulation. We have GDPR. We still don't have, and people may be familiar with PII, we still don't have that basket of goods, that key idea, what is sensitive data. I've been using the term sensitive data, and I was asking myself, like, what are the fields? I could come up with a list, but you might start to change that list. That might evolve. It might include your social media handles now. It might include your phone number. It might include your devices that you use. And indeed, for GDPR, some of those are included. So what does that basket of goods look like? I think we can start to shape it, but it involves making some assumptions. Second concept I'd like to introduce is reframing how we think about data breaches. So loss aversion is this concept that people would prefer not to lose something of equal value rather than obtain it. So I'd rather not lose $10 than gain $10. It's the same amount, $10, but I'd rather not lose it. Why? This comes from cognitive psychology and decision theory, and the idea is that I've already integrated the $10. It's in my wallet. I own it now. It's part of the status quo. This is how trial periods and rebates work. If you have a trial period, you've already integrated the product into your status quo, and so you're less likely to let it go. And so with data breaches and loss aversion, there are two studies that have been done that start to push this idea out, both having to do with privacy. So what is the value of privacy if you never felt like you had it to begin with? So both of these studies, one from 2014, one from 2016, explore this idea. And I like this a lot because, and particularly if you're thinking about policy, I would recommend the 2016 one, the monetary value of privacy. They really look at what are the policy implications. And by that, we mean, what are the privacy defaults? And you can reframe the way individuals make decisions based on how you set it up, if it's something that they already owned, or they feel like they already owned. That's one. And then the second is the second paper came to the conclusion that people were willing to start to think about privacy risk if it was tied to financial implications as well. So right now people say, yes, my data is for sale, or there's advertisers or whatever else. But if there was a more direct relationship, like a data wallet almost, people started to make privacy-focused decisions once they saw the connection between those. The last that I want to talk about is, I mentioned cybercriminals and market value. There's this concept of economic value, which captures what we had talked about earlier, intrinsic value. And when economists or financial professionals are trying to value a company and it doesn't have value, they really have to come up with a new rubric. So here's my proposal of 5 questions that could get us started in trying to think about the value of data and different data sets. So the first is, how easily can it be changed? So I can reset my password, could change my email address. It's a little harder to change my face. It's a little harder to reset my fingerprint. How unique is it? My email address ostensibly is. My first name is not. It's not common, but it's not unique. How does it relate to other data? So here's where you have the importance of marketing databases like Exactus. All of you know, having worked with databases and relational databases, the importance of that unique identifier, connective tissue between data sets. The fourth is, how often is it updated? So my social security number, not updated. My GPS coordinates, which cell tower I'm pinging, updated all the time. And how detailed is it? And by this, I mean, is it my personal information, or is it my consumption habits, my political leanings, my social network? How much granularity are we talking about? So there isn't an answer here like this one is valued more than this, but these 5 principles, immutability, frequency, recency, connectivity, and granularity, can start to help us rank and prioritize which data sets might be more valuable than others. And the reason this is important is because we need to start to not only think about cybercriminals as competitors, but fight cybercrime more effectively. And that involves empowering people to think about their privacy, not just security and privacy professionals such as yourselves, but also those that make resource allocation decisions and risk assessment and consumers. And so businesses will operate more sensibly, and we can protect data more consistently. So I will leave you with a painfully wonderful point, which is when it comes to value insensitive data, think about bills more than billy goats. Thank you very much.